listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by Regions. This is the show that focuses on workplace and workforce trends. This is going to change your day, folks. It's going to change the way you engage your workplace and your workforce. We do our best to find the people with the best insights about what's going on out there, and today will be no exception. I'm going to tell you what you're going to get in the second half of the show before we get into the first half of the show. A friend of mine in North Carolina emailed me a list, which was the 7 interview questions to hire top talent and to avoid toxic employees. Dianna Booher is her name. She wrote the article. It's been out for a while. It came across my desk just last week, and I called her and said, I got to talk to you about some of these questions and what they're designed to reveal. So if you have an interest in interview questions to help you avoid toxic employees, stick around. We're going to put her on the show about the bottom of the hour and go through some of these 7 questions and have her tell us stories about the questions, what to ask, what to listen for, and examples of how these questions prevented a hiring mistake. But right now, up first and fast, on the line with me is my friend Mark Sanborn. Mark and I are doing a webinar tomorrow at noon Central Time, focusing on the things that have changed in the way the workplace functions, in the ways teams function, in the way customers and employees function, etc. Mark is a leadership and customer service expert out of Denver, Colorado, a friend of mine with great insights, most importantly, on where things are going. Mark, welcome back to What's Working. It's nice to talk to you, my friend.
Hello, Cam. Likewise. Hey, by the way, everybody's going to love Dianna Booher. She's written more books than most of us have read. Literally, she's written over 40 books, and I might even be low on the number. So she's a great expert. If your listeners were thinking about grabbing lunch or late lunch, they should listen to what she has to say.
I wasn't aware that you knew her. That's great. That's a wonderful small world connection, Mark. Then again, you know mostly everybody, it seems, and I shouldn't be surprised by that. Let's talk about tomorrow. Let's talk about the webinar, the inaugural What's Working webinar for the listeners in this area here. We're focusing on the 3 to 4 changes you need to make today that are going to get you out of the COVID economy in the best way. Now, we got to come to our first break real quick here, but give me real quick, Mark, in a couple of minutes. For example, what is making leaders nervous right now, and what are you going to be able to address with them? And we'll get more detail into this when we're back from the break.
Well, you know, Cam, I'm less interested in what's making leaders nervous than I am what's making the people they lead nervous, because that's what they have to deal with. And one of the things that came out of the first research that I've seen, my firm did some research during COVID to find out what leaders did right and what they did wrong. And one of the big words for the future to deal with both in customers and employees is anxiety.
So let's talk about that anxiety real quick, and how might it manifest itself in, if I'm a leader, what am I looking for in anxiety in my team? What would identify that they have it?
Sure. One of the first things you have to look for is a lack of connection and a tactical versus strategic orientation. When I say a lack of connection, just as a sneak preview, the research that we did found that what leaders did best, by the way, it was still south of 50%. What leaders did best was communicate. What they did worst was keep my morale up. Well, why was it they were unable to keep morale up? I'd say first, probably because leaders, like all of us, were dealing with their own morale issues. But I think it also probably became very transactional. Leaders were dealing with the substance of what we have to do and what changes we need to make, and they somehow lost sight of how people were feeling. So, you know, making that connection and giving people a chance to be honest about how they're feeling is the first step to dealing with anxiety, because different people manifest anxiety differently.
So,
the second...
Wait, before you go into that, and we're going to go to break here in a moment, less than 50%, are you saying that the feedback was that less than 50% of the people felt that the leaders communicated well?
47%. This was the high water mark. 47% thought they communicated well. 33% were neutral. 20% thought they communicated badly. And by the way, you'll love this, Cam. Guess what group resonated best with their leaders during COVID?
I will answer that after the break. Perfect cliffhanger, Mark. Perfect. You're listening to What's Working. We'll be right back. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by Regions. On the line, Mark Sanborn. He left us with a cliffhanger. He talked about the low evaluation from employees about their employers in their communication styles, their communication habits during the time of the COVID crisis. And Mark, if I recall correctly, the question was, which group rated their leaders with the lowest score of their communication? Is that correct? And if so, I'll answer.
Well, go ahead.
Okay. Knowing what I know about the generations in the workplace, it was the Gen Xers. They're cynical. They're pessimistic. They don't like anything. They find fault with the sunrise and the sunset, and they're just kind of got a chip on their shoulder. I would say that they're the ones that evaluated the leaders with poor communication scores.
Well, first of all, you're a show-off. You are correct, but you're correct by a tiny margin because Gen Z was only 1% more positive about how their leaders communicated. And by the way, Cam, one of the things, since we're doing this webinar tomorrow, I think people need to know that there's a lot of information about what to do now out there given by people that don't know what to do now. I have made a very concerted effort, as I know you have in your work, to substantiate, not just anecdotally and observationally, but in this case through research, what's important to employers and employees. And so for the people who are thinking about attending the webinar, this isn't going to be put on a big smiley face, talk happy talk, and buy everybody a pizza, even though I think buying people a pizza is a good way to get them to watch the webinar. But this is about how you can, as a leader, do things, not just know things, but how you can do things that will help you not just survive, but thrive in the months and the years ahead.
Well, I think I know. That's the reason that I reached out to you about this is, number one, the substantiated information that you pull together. And number two, we're not talking about now. The crisis is here. There are some that say the crisis is over. My impression is the crisis is here. What I want to do is teach people what's around the corner as best as I can, to say this is the way things are going to come out. Therefore, these are the 4 things you need to begin to implement so that when you're around that corner, these things are ready. And by the way, folks, if you're wondering about his pizza comment, if you register for the webinar, you're going to get deep discounts on Mellow Mushroom and Marco's Pizza. You'll get that code with your webinar registration information, and you can register for the webinar at whatsworkingcam.com. Whatsworkingcam.com. It plays tomorrow at noon, from noon to 1 o'clock. Mark is leading it. I'll be in there adding comments, and then we'll do some Q&A towards the end. So, Mark, what else are you learning out there that we'll get into discussion with tomorrow and able to provide some insights on what's around the corner?
Well, here are 2 things I find very interesting. The first is when you and I spoke early on in the COVID crisis, I don't remember the exact date that you had me on your show, I said I didn't like the term back to normal. And I don't like the term new normal because it makes you flat-footed. And I said at the time, I rather preferred what Mark Cuban first said, at least first time I heard it, the new abnormal. Well, it's funny because yesterday I was in a webinar and the presenter said that the executives that they talk to don't like the word normal or new normal. They like even least. And so I'm going to suggest, and I'm going to talk about tomorrow a little bit, but even if they don't go to the webinar, they'll get this today. Normal isn't what happened. Normal is what's happening. And when you use that as a definition, that means that whatever happens is normal. Because it's happening, it means for the time being, and increasingly for less and less time, that is the new normal. So normal isn't what happened. And I think for people who are benchmarking against the past and hoping beyond hope that we return to it, we may regain some of those things. We won't regain them all. Second thing, Cam, I love this part. In our research across the primary categories of leadership skills that I thought were most important for leading in a crisis, one of them was keep my morale up. The highest score that leaders got for keeping morale up was 43% from millennials. What's fascinating to me is the lowest score they got was 30% from Gen Z. Now, here's the thing about research. Research tells you what, doesn't necessarily tell you why. But I'm going to suggest 2 things if you employ Gen Z. And the first is, if you think about how difficult COVID's been for us oldsters, anybody, older than you is an oldster, right?
Yep.
Think about how it must feel to people who busted their hump to graduate from high school and didn't get a graduation party, or graduate from college and couldn't celebrate with family. And I know that, a lot of those people aren't that young in Gen Z, but they're new to the workforce. Before they could even acclimate, they were hit with the kind of shocks that even people with experience and maturity would have been demoralized by. I think why that generation scored their leaders lowest on Keep My Morale Up is because they had the lowest morale to try to keep up.
Oh,
I just think that everyone has suffered and has experienced angst and anxiety, but I really feel for Gen Z who have got all the pressures of, I'm out in the workforce for the first time, I'm an adult responsible for my own life and maybe the lives of others, and now, before I even get the footing that I needed, this happens.
Yeah, I can see that. I can sense that. It's been, and gosh knows there's been a lot of tears cried over this, and it's been an unfair into either their high school or their college career for many of these Gen Z, and their first step into the workplace has not been something that has been celebrated. It's been a slight creep into the workplace, going to try to find work with record unemployment numbers. And it's just ironic, Mark, and you've heard this so many times, that if you and I had been saying that back in early March, it would be going to try to find work with record opportunities. In a short amount of time, it's become trying to find work with record unemployment numbers. So again, I say this so much, I'm tired of hearing myself say it. The suddenness of this shift is remarkable. I want to get into, Mark, the term that I used a moment ago, which is crisis. And I think, and I've said this, people are tired of talking about COVID. I feel I'm tired of talking about COVID. But it's still the most important thing going on in the business community. What do you think?
Well, I think in general, the problems that we in the U.S. have had culturally probably are the umbrella over even COVID. If you remember correctly, when we had the unfortunate killing of George Floyd and the demonstrations and the protests that followed, you'd think for about 2 weeks COVID had gone away, because the news cycle was primarily filled with those events.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean COVID went away. It just meant that while we're dealing with COVID, which is an unprecedented experience, and not too many people were around in 1917 to say, "Oh yeah, been there, done that, got the T-shirt." And then you put in the divisiveness we already had pre-COVID. You put in the civil unrest, the protests, the violence. And we basically started to really question, Cam, not just health. We started to question the very fabric of our culture. And that is the bigger uprising, the biggest upheaval that we're going to continue to deal with, even if we have a COVID vaccine. So I think you're right. I think what we ought to be learning isn't how to deal with COVID. Certainly that's the number one issue. We should be learning how to lead in times of crisis, because I don't want to be negative, but I think we're going to have plenty of crises in the months and years ahead, and we need to extract bigger lessons so that we're not continually reinventing the wheel.
You talked about in your opening comments the anxiety in the employees. Give me some insight on what you're hearing from customers these days, and what perhaps new tactics to approach customers that we may touch on tomorrow in the webinar might be.
Well, in the webinar, I'm going to make the point that customers and employees are the same people. And I don't mean that they're the same people that work for you that are your customers, but they're the same in the sense that they have the same hopes and fears and anxieties when they do business with you as they do when they work with you. My employee is the supermarket's customer. So I think it's insightful to think about, and to take time, as I mentioned earlier when we said this, to understand how people are feeling, the people that you lead, because the people that you lead are somebody's customers and likely represent your customers. I think that the big thing that, two big lessons in terms of anxiety, and one is people need to turn in tomorrow to know that even though anxiety is at the top of the list, there is a large percentage of people, a gratifyingly large percentage of people, that think things are going to be better, and I think they're right, and I'm going to talk a little bit why I think they're right tomorrow. But here's the deal. When you first of all, know that people are anxious. That's the first thing. Awareness is always the first thing a leader needs to get better. Then it's what you do. And I think what you do is you look for the anxiety points to the degree you can. Honestly, you provide both reassurance and you take actions to reduce those anxieties. I'll give you one quick example out of the webinar tomorrow, and maybe now I'll switch something else in there. But we went to Texas Roadhouse for a sit-down dinner, and a good friend of mine is a market manager for Texas Roadhouse. And so we went to one of his stores, and while we were waiting outside, everything was socially distanced. There was a young woman with a disinfectant bottle spraying signage and benches, and literally the poles, the signs were on. And I thought, you know what? Don't tell me that you're cautious in the kitchen and in your restaurant. Show me. I felt reassured. That directly addressed my anxiety because, frankly, you got to be pretty devious to spray the signs before you go in the restaurant and then not take the same level of care in the restaurant.
So she's living and breathing the conscientiousness that the customers want to see today that make them feel assured.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what it's no longer tell and show. It's show and tell.
Yeah,
it's always been show and tell for kids. Well, it's got to be that way for business now.
So one of the comments that I've heard recently, Mark, in a conversation that I had late last week, was about creativity under pressure. If there is anxiety, like what we've talked about, if there is the pressure in the workplace and people are concerned for themselves, their kids, just all the stuff that we're talking about, yet the job requires creativity. And it's hard to be creative under pressure like that. Do you have any insights into that?
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting about the research. Constraints are conducive to creativity, and there are a few constraints bigger than survival in terms of priority. Now, I want to be practical. When I was in sales, this was years ago, back when the American agriculture was really in the dumpster in terms of prices, and I called on a Massey Ferguson dealer, and I had a really good direct marketing program to help him reach more, farmers to buy his equipment. And at the end of my pitch, he said, I'll tell you what, I need your advice. I could either use the money I have to buy your program or pay this month's electric bill. What do you recommend? And he wasn't being flip. He was trying to, and it was a good education for me as a sales professional that, if it comes between keeping the lights on and buying some marketing program, of course you want to keep the lights on. So we can't ignore that we have to survive. But I think if people change their mindset, that these constraints will do more to force creativity. And of course, nobody likes to be forced. We'd rather volunteer, but sometimes you don't get a chance. I think this will do more to force creativity than anything that's happened recently for most businesses.
I have heard those comments that this environment has forced new reactions to situations that people hadn't considered in the past or that had not been presented them in the past. And many of these ideas that they've reacted to will become a part of their business going forward. They never would have, it's like a fighter pilot friend of mine told me one time, you see options when you're terrified. You see opportunities to do things that you had never considered when you're afraid. And he was talking about the whistle going off in his ear when he was fighting over Vietnam, and said he put that plane through paces that he had never thought he could do before and that they never taught in flight school because fear showed him opportunities that he didn't know was there. So I do hear what you're saying and what my friend said in conversations out there. I guess the opportunity, let's say, in sales or in service to create something for the customer that's new is more stymied in a pressure environment like this versus creating a way to stay alive. Comments on that before we go to break?
And here's the thing about customers. I don't think right now customers are on the edge of their seat waiting for the next reiteration of a product. I think customers are on the edge of their seat knowing how they can buy the products you already have safely and how those products you already offer will help them deal with the challenges they now face.
Yeah.
So I think that this idea of pride, and of course, there are going to be companies, about 10% of companies, and studying 4 recessions, about 10% of companies outpace their competitors and do better pre-crisis, pre-recession. So there are always those outliers, but I think for most of us, it's about how do we look at how we interact with and treat customers and what we create for them with the products we already have.
Mark Sanborn's going to join me tomorrow, noon, July 15th. whatsworkingcam.com to register for this. I'll say that website again when we come back from break. Pizza. I'll talk about pizza. Thanks, Mark. I'll talk to you tomorrow. We're back. I promised you information on pizza. Tomorrow's webinar. If you sign up for the webinar at whatsworkingcam.com, you will get a discount code for Marco's and Mellow Mushroom Pizza. Use that code to buy pizza for your team, gather them in the warehouse, around the conference table, alone at home at their desk. Eat pizza, watch the webinar, discuss the results. It's real proud of the way this thing is shaping up. You're going to want to be involved. On the line with me now, though, guest number 2. And I want to thank Dianna Booher. Dianna, and I saw her article. I picked the phone up, and I called her and said, this woman is busy. She's never going to answer the phone. She answered the phone. Dianna, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to What's Working.
Thank you, Cam. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
So the small world thing that I'd mentioned during the break was Mark Sanborn was on just before you a moment ago. He gave you a remarkable plug as I announced that you were upcoming, and actually gave a lot of the bio that I have here in front of me. He delivered already. She's the CEO of Booher Research, best-selling author of 47. He said 48 books. He was off, but that's pretty good still by memory. Your latest, Dianna, communicate like a leader, connecting strategically to coach, inspire, and get things done. She's been on Good Morning America, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, Investors Business Daily, Forbes, Fast Company, on and on and on. It's a good get to have you here, Dianna. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to sharing some information.
So let's talk about this article. And this really, like I said, captured my attention. 7 interview questions to hire top talent and avoid toxic employees. You say your success, people's success, leaders' success often depend on emotional intelligence and their team's emotional intelligence. Well-planned questions are a good way to find that emotional intelligence out. Most applicants have rehearsed for likely questions, so you're going to want people to give them examples. Tell me what the nucleus or the root of this article was, and then let's pick 4 or 5 of these questions to discuss.
Okay. Well, basically, most of us get in the habit, as hiring managers to hire the same people. And so after a while, if somebody's been on that job market for 2 or 3 months, they've memorized answers. They've been coached. And so you've got to get some questions that go beyond the standard ones that they're expecting to really figure out their character and their values and if they're going to fit in with your culture. I think a lot of people, when they hire, still, even though they know better, they still hire with first impressions or gut reactions rather than really trying to dig down and find out what that person's all about. You make a bad mistake with a hire, and it's cost you a lot of money.
We've talked about that on this show. Is the hazard of a gut reaction of saying, I just like this guy or I just like this lady. They're going to work out here. Oftentimes we find something in that person that reminds us of ourselves. And for that reason, it triggers the gut reaction of liking them, not really determining whether they would be a good fit. So let's begin with one of these questions. And
let me give you,
yeah.
You asked me about my core thesis here. Let me just mention that. I failed to do that a minute ago. We tend to, once we like somebody, like you just said, we tend to project on them and hear things we want to hear. So we tend to phrase questions like, in the future, if this happened, what would you do?
Yeah.
And, of course, we don't know if they'll really do that or not. So the best thing to keep in the back of your mind is to focus on what they've already done. The attitudes they've already had, the accomplishments they've already had, the values they've already demonstrated, and then you're going to get to the real core of the person.
Yeah, I interviewed a guy last week in New Orleans for the show that will come up, and I said, how do you find people that are accomplished at selling $5 million works of art? That's got to be a small group. He said, I find the person with the attitude that is right for the customer, and then I teach them how to sell the art. And it's higher attitude, train for skills, but let's get into one of these questions. And by the way, the guy that sent it to me said this would be great in a debate, a political debate. So who are the 3 to 5 people in the public arena or your personal or social life whom you admire and why? Tell me about that question. What is it designed to elicit?
It reveals several things. First of all, how informed they are. If they can't name anybody in the public arena, tells you they're not staying very much up to date with local happenings or current events or politics or pop culture or anything. I mean, they're pretty much an introvert and just tuned into their own world. And there's got to be reasons for that. On the other hand, if they mention only personal people, they know people in their social circle, you think that they don't have much of a balance, so to speak. And what you're looking for is the why they admire them. And maybe that why is relevant to what you're looking for in values. If somebody said something about, I admire someone because they really know how to get great media, grow their company, but maybe that's not going to be their job. And you want, that doesn't tell you a lot about their character. But when they say something like, well, I really admire my dad because he always taught me this and so, then you're getting to more character issues and value issues.
So you're looking for 3 to 5 so that they can't answer with one and be off the hook. 3 to 5 makes them go both personal and public figures.
Yes, and it makes them think because that question usually is a frame so they have to name one person. Tell me somebody you admire and why. But when you ask them for 3 to 5, they haven't memorized that.
Right.
They haven't rehearsed that in their canned interview practices, and so they have to sort of think off the cuff. And that's where they ramble on and let you find out things that they may have wanted to hide.
So would people think off the cuff? Are you suggesting that when people think off the cuff on a question like this, they go into history and experiences to provide answers versus rehearsed scripted answers?
Yes. You want to get past, there's just so many websites out there, so many articles, so many counselors, career counselors that are helping people or telling people to memorize, anticipate these questions. You can go online and find, here are the 50 most asked questions for job applicants. And they rehearse those. So you've got to get past that. You've got to throw them off that script.
Well, I know employers out there are slowly ramping up now after many of them having dismissed people. This would be very valuable to them. I'm curious, go back to question number 1. I'll re-ask it again so you can remember who are 3 to 5 people in the public arena or your personal or social life whom you admire and why. Is it appropriate for me as the question asker to have a template of an answer that I want to hear already in my head that would be good for the job I'm interviewing for?
I think it would be best to have a checkpoint, not necessarily a template of answers that you want, but a checkpoint. Did they mention people in both categories or in all three, social, personal, public? Did the why answers check out and match with the values you hold? Or you might say, what values demonstrated here? And then you can fill those in. So I would have a template of evaluation questions.
Here's question number 3 of the 7. Can you recall ever seeing or hearing about someone mistreated in the workplace? How did you handle the situation? What are you going for there?
Really, both values and ethics in this question. If they say they've never seen anyone mistreated, then you may ask, well, are they really tuned in? Because there are mistreatments frequently, even if it's just a boss that passes over somebody who is obviously qualified for promotion. That's sort of a minor injustice compared to, something like racial injustice or religious injustice or something like that. But what you're looking for is, did they take action? So the follow-up question, once they say, well, yeah, I have, then, well, what did you do about it? And if they say, well, it wasn't my place, or I didn't want to jeopardize my job or whatever, again, you're checking values. You're seeing how strongly they are willing to stand up for something that was an injustice. Did they just think it was an injustice, or did they really take action to stop it? And if so, how persuasive were they? If they go on to say there was some kind of injustice, but yeah, I did take action, I did report it. Did they report it to 3 or 4 different people? Did they write an email about it? Did they talk to some colleagues so that they really went as a unit and spoke to the regional director about this policy needs to be changed because of X, Y? I mean, you can see their level of commitment to doing something about which they feel strongly.
Yeah, I could see how this question would also, the nosy nitpicker type of employee may really shine in this question. They may not let it go. There may be the employer that says, "Hey, that's none of your business what happened there," or something like that. How do you do? Where's the fine line between those two?
Yes, that's true. And if they say something like, "Well, just some minor incident that they considered an injustice," you may not consider that an injustice at all, and so you may chalk that up to being a tattletale, to being a busybody. But another thing that you'll always learn, no matter which way they go there, is how much risk did they take? If they were the tattletale, they're probably not risking much. But if they started a movement because of the way they perceived a policy, that says they had some degree of leadership among their colleagues.
Yep.
They were respected for something, not just a troublemaker.
And I notice you only call on question number 3, just the one we're talking about. You're not asking for 3 to 5 examples. You're asking for one and the follow-up. So each of these questions is not seeking multiple examples. It's seeking something unique. That's true. Yeah. Let's get one more in before.
In fact, if you ask about if they've seen injustices done or mistreatment, and they tell you about 10 cases, they are a troublemaker.
Then the problem is sitting in front of you, isn't it?
Yes, right.
Okay, here's number 4. Would you tell me about a particularly bad day you've had this year or two, or past year or two, a day when nothing was routine and almost everything went wrong? How did you deal with all the stress and calamity?
Yeah, Cam, this came to me when I was thinking about Judith Bjork's book. I don't know if you're familiar. Most parents have long ago put this one aside, but it was a children's book called Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. And it goes on to tell about, the main character, this happened to him, and then this happened to him, and it's terrible, etc. And that's kind of what you're getting at here. And when you get an answer, does your idea of what a terrible, horrible thing to happen, does it match their idea? I mean, obviously, this is subjective judgment here, but if they say, "Oh, yeah, one morning I got up in the garage door, I had an awful time, but it took me 10 minutes to get the garage door open to get out." And that was their terrible, horrible day. And you're thinking, gee, I have that happen frequently, or I've had 3 times like that in one day. So,
yep. Dianna, we're going to go to break. This is fantastic. We're going to go to break, and we're going to pick up on question 4 and then get into a couple of the others. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by Regions. On the line with me, Dianna Booher. Is the CEO of Booher Research, her website. Listen closely now, because you're going to want to go here and find some of this content. Booher, BooherResearch.com. She's on the phone with me. We're talking about her article called The 7 Interview Questions to Hire Top Talent. They're designed to elicit feedback in your candidate that they haven't rehearsed, and that is going to tell you a lot about their emotional intelligence and more. Leaders in the workplace, team members in the workplace, peers, colleagues in the workplace are dependent upon the emotional intelligence of the people they work around to achieve. Dianna, let's go on to the next question. These are fascinating. I want to go into...
Cam, I want to add one other thing about the question we were just talking about their terrible, horrible day and what they consider. Ask yourself, too, what kind of initiative they took. Did they have to call somebody else to the rescue to save the situation? Whether it was, being late to a client meeting or car trouble or whatever it is, or were they resourceful?
Yes.
That's another key thing you can discover there.
I'm dealing with something like that, Dianna, at home right now. Dad, the internet's out. All right, there's the number. Well, Dad, the internet's out. All right, there's the number. Troubleshoot it with them. Dad. Yeah, I wouldn't hire my kids right now, frankly. I'll be honest with you. All right, here's number 5. What are your 5 biggest accomplishments to date? How would you rank order those? Why were each of these things important to you? Why 5 biggest accomplishments, Dianna?
Again, they've rehearsed their top 3.
Oh.
It's a common question, but when you give them, I want 5. They'll tend to give you accomplishments on the job, like 2 or 3 big projects. But then when they get past that, what are they going to say? They've memorized those 3 that have to do with leading a team to do X or selling a $3 million contract or whatever. But do they ever say anything about work they've done in the community Do they ever say anything about a civic group that they've led to accomplish something, a church, something that they've done, anything with their family? In fact, their family and the way their kids turned out might be one of their biggest accomplishments, or helping or mentoring a spouse to accomplish their dream. Again, all of that tells you a little bit about that they're a well-rounded person and what they consider meaningful work and what they consider a meaningful accomplishment. Don't let them get off the hook with just, 2 or 3 things they've accomplished on the job.
All right, so I'm going to play the devil's advocate. First, I love the question, but for the purpose of devil's advocate, let's assume I'm the interviewee, you're interviewing me, you're the interviewer, and you say, Cam, give me the 5 biggest accomplishments to date. I say, I'm going to give you 3. And I articulate my 3. They're rehearsed, and you probably know it. They're rehearsed, and I stop at 3. And do you then say, listen, I need 5. If I don't get 5, you're out of here. In fact, I'm going to call your mother if I don't get 5.
I pause. You would be surprised just what silence communicates to the person. So if you just stop with 3 and said, I can't think of anything else, I'm going to say, well, we're not in a hurry. I'll wait.
Oh, wow.
And that puts the ball back in your court. And if you can't think of anything, again, it just says that you don't think well on your feet. There really have been no accomplishments, or you don't consider what other people might consider important, like raising a family or a happy marriage or community life, that you don't consider any of that important. And again, that communicates something to you about their values. But just silence. Silence, and people will keep talking. It's
amazing. I use that one from time to time. And I mentioned my kids. I use it at home every now and then. I just look at my kids and I say, I heard. And don't say anything else. I didn't hear anything. I'm just curious what they'll say. And they end up admitting to things that they probably would have gotten away with had I not used that that tactic. I heard what you did, and be silent.
And the follow-up to that is, do you want to tell me first?
Yeah, exactly.
I tell you?
Yep, I use that one.
That's a great parent question.
Okay, number 7, explain a new idea to me. For example, take a complex term, product, service, or project in a past job and explain it to me so well that I could teach a session on it tomorrow. By the way, Dianna, this is my favorite.
Well, it's my favorite, too, because, my specialty all of my career has been communication skills. But you learn so much because there are very, very, very few jobs that the person does not have to communicate. They may not be communicating with the client. They're communicating with coworkers and their supervisor, et cetera. And so what you're listening for there is, do they overview the idea clearly, or they just jump in with details so you're lost from the very beginning? And then just how do they organize their thoughts? Is it a logical progression? Do they break it down in steps or stages? Or they just are here, there, and everywhere? Do they make a lot of assumptions? And another thing, Cam, that's really important when they're doing this, and I've done this a lot with applicants, is to watch their body language, how impatient they get. If you stop them and ask, let's say they're starting to explain the advantages of a pencil over a pen or something like that, and you say, wait a minute, I missed the last thing you say, and their eyes kind of roll like, are you kidding me? I said that very clearly. And, or they have an arrogant attitude sometimes about a simple topic, or they seem to talk down. Whatever they're doing, if it's tone of voice, if it's attitude, if it's body language, or just organization of thought, that's the same way they're going to communicate on the job about their task, how they tell their boss they've done something or not done something, and how they communicate with your customers.
Excellent, Dianna. This has been great. I'm going to read everybody the website one more time if you want more information on this woman and her 48 books. 48. Booher, Booher, research.com. Is it 48 or 47, Dianna? I don't want to give you more credit than you deserve.
The last one came out about 7 months ago.
Of course it did.
48.
So you'll have another one in a couple of minutes, it sounds like.
Every time I miss a flight and have to spend the night in some strange hotel.
Good. Booher, Booher, research.com. Dianna Booher. Thank you so much, Dianna. Folks, don't forget to register for tomorrow's webinar with Mark Sanborn, noon Central. You can get discounts on a pizza if you do so. We'll have another show on Thursday, and hopefully I'll see many of you tomorrow. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good week.